Rand Paul is in first and second place in the first of the nation states of Iowa and New Hampshire. And Rand Paul polls better than anybody against the Democrats' runaway frontrunner Hillary. And that's in a huge field. So that's encouraging. Why is that happening? It's the message. It's Rand Paul's message. It's a principled message, yet it's welcoming and it's attracting new people. You know, Rand Paul's message is attracting young people. I see a lot of young people here today. That's great. I still think I'm a young person. My hair's saying something else, but I consider myself a young person. That's because these ideas are young ideas. In the history of the world, you know, freedom is still actually a new concept. You know, tyranny has been the norm in the history of the world. So these are young and fresh ideas, and it's time for these fresh ideas that transcend traditional partisan politics as usual. It's time for something new in the great American experiment. It's time for us all to take a stand, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to stand with Rand. I'm asking you to be a part of this. Be a part of this winning campaign that's changing the debate in Washington and all across America. Join us. Stand with Rand, and let's be part of taking our country back. Thank you. And now, would you please turn your attention to the screens for a few words from Senator Paul's delightful wife of 24 years, Mrs. Kelly Paul.
I met Rand on a beautiful spring day in April. Thought he was cute. He was a cute, curly-headed guy. I also thought he was probably 18 years old and still in college. He looked so young. So I kind of blew him off at first. But Rand kept trying. He was kind of persistent at the party, and he came up to me again a little bit later, and we started talking. And during our conversation, I realized that he was not 18. He was 26 and a surgical intern at Georgia Baptist. Very intelligent, very well-read, and really like no one that I'd ever met before. Rand is the middle child of 5. From what I've heard from his siblings growing up, he's a lot like he is today. He was opinionated, had a lot of energy, played a lot of sports. He also loved to collect coins, which is something that he used to do with his grandmother. He was very close to her, and through the years, as her eyesight began to fail, he became her eyes to spy the faint mint marks on the coins as they would go through them together. Rand never forgot how sad it was for him to watch his grandmother lose her vision. And I think that really cemented in him the desire to be an ophthalmologist. One of the most gratifying things for Rand in his career has been the ability to do eye surgery on children from Guatemala starting 15 years ago. And now he's gone back to Guatemala and operated on hundreds of other patients there. One couple that Rand told me about was especially powerful and memorable. He operated on a woman who had not been able to see. 2 days later, she brought her husband, and he was also blinded by cataracts. And Rand described them removing his patch and him seeing his wife and her being able to see him for the first time in 7 or 8 years. And he said it was an incredibly moving experience. I think it's moments like that that really speak to who he is as a surgeon and what motivates him. Rand is a wonderful dad. He's got great energy and enthusiasm, and he's always been a wonderful builder of forts, bonfires, anything active and outside. You know, from an early age, all of our boys loved sports, and Rand has coached Little League baseball, soccer, you name it. He's out there. Being a physician gives Rand a unique perspective in Washington, simply because he's trained to diagnose a problem and find a solution. He truly believes that if you believe in something, you should get involved. If you put your mind and your energy to it, you can do it. And I think that's a great example for our kids. And it's also something that makes him an amazing person to be married to. Rand has the energy, the ideas, the honesty to really help restore the prosperity and hope in our country. He loves making a difference as a doctor, and he believes that he can make a difference as the president.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the next President of the United States, Senator Dr. Rand Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. When I first told my wife that I was going to run for office, she said, now why would you want to trade being one of the most respected professions to being one of the least respected professions? And it wasn't without some trepidation that I decided to run. I tell people that I got tired of throwing things at my TV, and this is true. I was frustrated not just really with Democrats, but often with Republicans who promised one thing and then did another. I was concerned that we were adding so much debt to our country. We add $1 million every minute. So in the next 10 hours of my speaking to you, we're going to add quite a bit of debt. Now, I'll probably go a little bit less than 10 hours. But the thing is we're going to add an enormous amount of debt to our kids and our grandkids. Our debt, our overall debt, is now as big as our economy. And many economists say when your debt gets this large, that you're actually losing 1 million jobs a year. So if you've got a 26-year-old that still lives in your basement, you wish they had a job, we've got to do something different. Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've had a war on poverty for 50-some-odd years, and we've got more poverty than we've ever had. We have unemployment that's still at record levels. You wouldn't guess it because the government now says, oh, it's at 5%. And yet we have historic numbers of people who are no longer in the labor force. What does that mean? We don't count them. So if you're not looking for a job and you're permanently unemployed, you're no longer counted in the statistics. People say, oh, unemployment's fine. Well, that's because millions of people have given up looking for work, which isn't good. So we have to do something different. Cities like Baltimore, African-American males between the age of 20 and 25 have a 37% unemployment. It's worse than the Great Depression. So maybe we shouldn't keep doing the same thing over and over again. People on the other side are saying, well, what about income inequality? Well, yeah, we do have it. It's worse in cities run by Democrats, states run by Democrats, and right now, countries run by Democrats. So the thing is if we want to try to make things better, maybe we need to think about another way. This last week, I put forward a plan to have a simple flat tax where everybody pays their fair share, everybody pays, and you can fill it out on one page. 14.5% for personal income tax, 14.5% for business tax. People say, well, why would you want to do that? Because I want to leave more money in Iowa, send less money to Washington, leave more money in Kentucky, frankly, leave more money in Detroit, Chicago. The way you get jobs creation is you have to leave more money in the productive sector. You are the productive sector. When you look at Washington, that's the non-productive sector. Now you can have some government. We all need government. Thomas Paine said that government is a necessary evil. What did he mean by that? You have to give up some of your liberty to have government. That means you have to pay some taxes. And I'm not against that. I'm for some government. I'm for paying some taxes. But if we tax you at 100%, then you've got 0% liberty. If we tax you at 50%, you're half slave, half free. I frankly would like to see you a little freer and a little more money remaining in your communities so you can create jobs. It's a debate we need to have. We haven't had this debate in a long time. In 1980, when Reagan ran, we did have the debate. We had a debate over lowering taxes, significantly lowering tax rates, and millions of jobs were created. So the debate is, do you want to send your money to Washington and then beg to get some of it back? And then who do we give it to? So, for example, we gave a lot of money to President Obama and he passed some of it back out. He gave $535 million to one of the richest men in our country to build solar panels. And it turned out the company went belly up because people didn't want this fellow's solar panels. But the question is, should we have ever sent it to Washington to begin with? And once you send your money to Washington, someone has to pick who gets it. Someone has to pick the winners and losers. But the thing is, in Washington, they have no idea who in Cedar Rapids would be good at business. Now the difference between a tax reduction to give you your money and sending it to the government and having it sent back is a tax reduction, you choose who gets the biggest tax reduction. Who's going to get the biggest tax reduction in Cedar Rapids? The person who you vote for every day. Every day you go and shop, every day you buy something, you're voting. It's called democratic capitalism. So the people in your town that have the most money have voluntarily served you up something that you want, and you buy it from them. So when we reduce taxes, they will get a bigger tax cut. People don't quite understand this, and it scares people to death. They say, you're going to cut the taxes more for the rich than the poor. Well, if we cut everybody's taxes 1%, here's a math question. Which number is going to be bigger, 1% of $1 million a year or 1% of $10,000 a year? The tax cut's always bigger for the person who makes more, even when you make it the same percentage. But you want that money in your community. Have you ever worked for a poor person? We want more money to be with the business owners. But the difference is with my tax cut proposal is it's a flat tax proposal, but it'll also help the working class. We're going to take the payroll tax, FICA, that comes out of everybody's check, roll it into the business tax, and have no more FICA. So if you make $40,000 a year and you pay about $2,000 in FICA, it's gone. It's going to be paid for by the business and not by the individual. So I think this is a tax cut that we can then have the debate. Do you want to do the Democrat way, where you send it to Washington and they send some back, a percentage back, or would you rather Washington just not take it ever to begin with? The problem with Washington passing it out is, think of it this way. If I say, I've got $100,000 today from your government that you gave me, and I'm going to give it back to you, and I'm going to pick one of you to start a Pizza Hut. Okay, John Smith, here's $100,000. You start and employ people out of Pizza Hut because we'll create jobs that way. Here's the problem. 50% of businesses fail. So really what you want to do is give money back to the businesses that succeed so they can grow, and only you can determine that. You think somebody in Washington knows which business will succeed? They know that about as well as they know which teacher's a good teacher. I don't think you should determine who your good teachers are by asking somebody in Washington. So I'm for decentralizing things, leaving money at home in a dramatic way. People have asked, how are we going to win? How are Republicans going to win again? There are 18 states the Republicans haven't won in 30 years. So how are we going to win? We're going to do the same thing over and over again? Well, one of the proposals in Washington is to have revenue-neutral tax reform. They're not even for tax cuts anymore. These are the Republicans. Republican leadership in the Senate and the House wants to do revenue-neutral tax reform. You know what that means? Half of you will pay more, half of you will pay less, and the net result is zero. Well, how's that going to help the economy? You've just shifted the burden. I tell people, frankly, if that's what we're for, I'll go back home. I've got no interest doing all this if we're not going to really be for something. I think we need to be more boldly for what we are for. I don't think we need to dilute what we're for. We need to be more boldly for. Let's have a nominee that has a clear-cut purpose. Let's have a nominee that, once again, is for cutting taxes. But to win again, we need to be the party that is broader, bigger. I say with tattoos and without tattoos, with earrings and without earrings. We need a more, there you go, we need to be a more diverse party. That means rich, poor, black and white, working class, business class. How do we do that? Do we have to dilute our message and be more like the Democrats, or can we be proudly for what we are for, but find a portion of what we are for, a portion of the liberty message that resonates with a bigger crowd? I frankly think we can. What I call it and what I describe it as is, let's be the party of the entire Bill of Rights. You know, we're great on the Second Amendment. All 55 Republicans running for president will come to Cedar Rapids probably, and they'll all tell you they're for the Second Amendment, and most of them are probably telling the truth. But the thing is, why don't we be for the Fourth Amendment also? The right to privacy, the right to be left alone. I stood for 10.5 hours. My feet are still sore from standing that long. For your right to be left alone. Justice Brandeis said that the right to be left alone is the most cherished of rights. He wrote this in a dissenting opinion when the Supreme Court got it wrong. In 1928, the Supreme Court said that your phone conversations, not just your phone records, but that your conversations were not protected by the Fourth Amendment. And the Supreme Court got it horribly wrong. Justice Brandeis got it right, and now everybody remembers Justice Brandeis' comments. It took 40 years till 1968 until the Supreme Court reversed themselves. The Supreme Court has many times gotten things wrong. Plessy versus Ferguson, it was 1898, said separate but equal was good. That's fine. Blacks and whites can be in different places. Now nobody believes that. But there was a dissent. The opinion was wrong. It was 6-3. But Justice Harlan wrote, in a now famous dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson, he said that the Constitution is colorblind and does not support a caste system. So occasionally we get it right, but one of the great things about our country is we have enough stability, enough sense of the rule of law, that eventually it comes around and we get it right. We still have this debate now over your phone records. The people who want to grab up all your phone records, they say your phone records are not protected at all by the Fourth Amendment. I disagree. There was a case in 1979, Maryland versus Smith, in which the government did rule, and I think once again ruled incorrectly. They said that you have no expectation of privacy in your phone records. Justice Marshall disagreed. Justice Marshall said that privacy is not a discrete commodity possessed wholly or not at all. That you don't give up an expectation of privacy. And now we're discovering that through your phone records, I can determine a lot about you. 2 Stanford students put an app voluntarily on some phones of their friends just to monitor the duration of their phone records and who they called to see what they could determine. 85% of the time they could determine your religion. Nearly 100% of the time they can match it and determine your doctors. If I know who your doctors are, many times I can determine what your diseases are. It goes worse, it goes further than that, it gets worse. There's a new agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. It's part of Dodd-Frank. They made it part of the Federal Reserve. And guess what? Congress doesn't fund it. You don't fund it, and you don't get to vote on its funds. Its funds come out automatically, all the time, continuously from the Federal Reserve. It is truly an immortal and eternal program. In fact, that's what Reagan said. Reagan said the closest thing to immortality in this world is a government program. And he was right. So you now have this agency that is eternal, and your congressmen and women have no control over. But you know what they're doing? This was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. This agency is collecting 95% of your credit card information. The big surveillance people, the people who don't care about your privacy, say, oh, well, Fourth Amendment doesn't protect your credit card information. Think about it. Many people's whole life now revolves through their credit card. I can tell whether you drink, whether you smoke, whether you gamble, and how much. I can tell what you read, what books, what magazines. I can tell what medicines you buy if you buy them using your credit card. What I say is all of your records are none of the government's damn business. Everybody's consumed with the Republican primary in Iowa. I'm thinking about the general election. Who can beat Hillary Clinton? Right now, I'm the only one that's ahead of Hillary Clinton in Iowa, New Hampshire, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And the reason is not only do I talk about low taxes, less regulation, small government, balanced budgets, all the stuff that Republicans, I think, is the core of our message, but I also talk about some other issues, some liberty issues. The Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy, brings out some of these young people. It brings out college campuses. It allows me to go to Liberty University, Jerry Falwell's university, and Berkeley, one of the most liberal universities, and get a standing ovation and get applause for the right to be left alone. It's how you win elections. And it's not giving up on what we believe in. It's taking an extension of the liberty message and saying to young people, I'll protect your right to be left alone. This is the way you win elections. We're leading Hillary Clinton among independents across the board in all 5 of those states. We're leading her among independents across the nation. And I don't think this is diluting the message. This is taking part of our message and going after a new constituency. Of people under 40, 83% of them think the government went too far in collecting our phone records. Here's how the president responds. The president responds and he says, well, we need to balance liberty and security and, maybe Congress should send me something. So we did. We told him to quit collecting our records. You know what he's doing right now? He's suing to continue collecting records as long as he can. So he said he was concerned when he ran for office for your privacy. He said he would be for the rule of law. He said he would only go to war when Congress approved it. Until he became president, then not so much. We've now been at war for 9 months and there's been no vote from Congress. Now, I'm not saying we don't need to do something. I think we do need to do something about ISIS. But I'm disappointed that we're having to fight against our own weapons. I voted against sending weapons into Syria because I said those people hate us. Why would we send them weapons? Those people will be fighting alongside Al-Qaeda. In fact, our ambassador said that. He came before our committee and I said, well, aren't these people, some of them are our enemies? He said, yeah, we're going to give the weapons to the moderates. But it's inevitable that the moderates will fight alongside the jihadists. Really. And you can tell the difference. And you don't speak Arabic. And you can tell the difference. One CIA analyst that looked at the Syrian civil war said this. He said, the only thing moderate about the Syrian rebels is their ability to fight. That's turned out to be true. ISIS now has $1 billion worth of Humvees. They have tanks. They've got $1 billion in cash. They're the richest terrorist organization ever. Where did they get the cash? American dollars? From the bank where we left it, in Mosul. Why did the Iraqis rip their uniforms off and run? Because there's a political problem over there that we've presided over and allowed to happen. We supported Maliki against the will of his people for a decade or more. And what did Maliki do? He kicked all the Sunnis out of the army, kicked all the Sunnis out of the government. So you have an entirely sectarian Shiite government, and then you've got the Sunnis. And these areas that are dominant, Mosul is 95% Sunni. So when ISIS comes, they say, the people who live in Mosul, who do we hate worse? The Shiites in Baghdad or ISIS? They don't know how bad ISIS is, and they're going to discover it. But the thing is that they were caught in the mix of that. But it's a problem. You're never going to win the war. No war's ever going to be won over there until you have Sunnis included in the fighting. When the surge happened and the surge worked in 2007, it's because the Sunni chieftains were brought along to fight finally. So the answer over there isn't dumping 100,000 Americans or 500,000 Americans in there again. The answer is maybe we should help the Kurds. The Kurds will fight and have been fighting. Maybe we should offer the Kurds a homeland. If they'll fight for it, give them the land when they're done. Maybe the Turks ought to fight. Maybe the Saudi Arabians ought to fight. Does anybody remember who attacked us on 9/11? Primarily Saudi Arabians. So we went to war in Iraq. Go figure. If we're going to learn something from the Middle East, and this will separate me from the other Republicans, I think we should learn from history and not ignore it. They asked Jeb Bush the other day, knowing what you know now, would you go back into Iraq? And his first answer was yes. Asked Rubio that, his question is yes. Everybody said they want to go back in. It's like, where have they been living for the last 15 years? You remember Hussein was a bulwark against Iran. All these people who want to go back over there, they also are unhappy with Iran. But why is Iran stronger? Because Hussein's gone. We now have Iranian troops in Iraq. Iraq has become a vassal state. It's destroyed by civil war, and there are thousands of Iranian troops in Iraq. Iran is stronger now because of Hussein being gone. If there's one truth that we should all learn, when you topple a secular strongman in the Middle East, you get chaos. And out of the chaos arises radical Islam. Hillary's war in Libya, same thing. We went in, we toppled Gaddafi. Gaddafi kept down radical Islam because he didn't want them cutting his throat. So he kept them down. Was he a good person? No. Should we give arms to Gaddafi? No. But should we give arms to the other side? No. Because what happened is you got rid of Gaddafi. Libya is now a jihadist wonderland. They swim in our swimming pool. Our embassy fled. Our ambassador was assassinated. It's a disaster. How could we ever consider nominating Hillary Clinton to be president? We'd get more disasters like Libya. For 9 months before the ambassador was killed, they pled for more security. What did Hillary Clinton do? She did what people do who are afraid and don't like guns. Oh, we don't want to show the Libyans that we have guns because they're freedom fighters and they will be offended if our troops have guns. So she sent her troops home. 6 special forces home in February before the assassination. March, another 6 special forces sent home. While she's sending and bringing the security forces home and they're begging to be left to protect the ambassador, they asked for a plane. So they request a DC-3 to be kept in the country in case there's emergency. Hillary Clinton's State Department denied. About 3 days after they deny it, though, Hillary Clinton approved $100,000 for an electrical charging station for the embassy in Vienna. Seems they got over there with their Chevy Volts and forgot the right plugs. So plane to fly around the country denied. $100,000 charging station for one of the embassies to show off how green we are, approved. You get to the summertime, what's Hillary Clinton spending the money on? She has no money for security for the embassy, which of course she'll blame on Republicans. No money left for security, but what was Hillary Clinton spending her money on? The summer before the ambassador was killed, she spent $650,000 on Facebook ads. It seems the State Department's Facebook didn't have enough friends. She spent $700,000 on landscaping for the embassy in Brussels. They spent $5 million, this is Hillary Clinton's State Department, $5 million on crystal glassware and barware for our embassies. No money for Benghazi. They spent $100,000 sending 3 comedians to India on the Make Chai Not War tour. It gets to August, a month before the ambassador's killed. In August, there's 16-man personnel team, security team left. That's all that's left. And then there's a militia, the February 17th militia. Colonel Wood's leading this team, and he says, we need to stay. It's getting increasingly dangerous. They tried to blow up the British ambassador. 2 of our people were kidnapped. It's getting increasingly dangerous. He pleads and pleads. Finally, the cables now are coming from the ambassador directly to Hillary Clinton. The ambassador is assassinated. No security is left for them. The 16-man personnel team is brought home. Nobody's left. When the attack happened, the February 17th militia, mostly Al-Qaeda, somebody was calling them freedom fighters, Al-Qaeda and jihadists, were gone. Disappeared. In fact, some have made conjecture that they were in on it and helped to plot the attack and helped to tell people where we were. So when we do the investigation, Hillary Clinton comes before my committee. And I had this question for her. I said, Secretary Clinton, did you read the cables that were pleading for more security? And she acted kind of huffy, like, oh, I had more important things to do, and that was someone else's job. You know what? When you're the head of the ship, you are the head of the ship, and all decision-making comes back to you. But I think Hillary Clinton, by her dereliction of duty, by her inability to make the correct decision-making, should forever preclude her from being considered for the presidency. If we're going to win again, we need to be the party of the entire Bill of Rights. Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, right to privacy, Fifth and Sixth Amendment, the right to justice, to be treated fairly by your government. The government's now been taking our property, I think, in defiance of the Fifth Amendment, through regulatory takings and otherwise. The new regulation that they're putting forward on the waters of the USA, that the President has put forward without the approval of Congress, essentially says that 97% of the land in Iowa is under federal jurisdiction now. And I'm not against the government protecting the waterways. I want them to protect the Mississippi River. I want them to protect the Great Lakes. But it's gotten absurd. They say if a bird could have been on the Mississippi River and flown into my backyard, they can regulate my backyard. Well, I think we're spending so much time and effort on my backyard, you're forgetting about the Mississippi River. You remember those tanks that leaked chemicals into the Ohio River and polluted it for days and days and days, and people in West Virginia couldn't drink their water? Why wasn't somebody looking at those tanks? because we're spending about $100 million a year harassing private property owners and looking at someone's farm where they're draining off water so they can plant crops. We've decided that a wetland is any kind of land that has one of 300 plants. I'm not against protecting the Everglades, okay? But stay the hell out of my backyard. Leave us alone. In recent years, the Supreme Court's gotten it wrong in a lot of cases. The Kelo case, they said that eminent domain can be used to take from one private property owner and given to another private property owner. Why? Well, they said this private property owner just has a house or a condo, and they're not paying much in taxes, but this big box store will pay more, so we're going to take it from you to give it to this person so we get more tax revenue. They've even done it to churches. They've said, well, the church is not paying any taxes, so what right do they have to their property? Let's take it and give it to a business that'll pay taxes. That's not my understanding of private property. My understanding is the government should never, ever take it from one private property owner and give it to another. But it isn't just about private property. It isn't just about property owners. A lot of big government is abusing the rights of ordinary citizens, in fact, poor citizens more than rich citizens. We do something in government called civil asset forfeiture. In fact, the government gives incentives to take your property. In fact, the local people who take your property or your cash are given a percentage of it if they can get it from you. Here's how it works. You're riding down the street. You don't use your blinker. You're pulled over for an unsafe lane change. The government says, do you have any money? You say, well, I've got $1,000. I'm going to the dentist to get a tooth fixed. And they say, give it to me. You say, why? And they say, we don't care. Or am I being charged with a crime? No. Give us your money. And you protest, and they say, all right, they'll negotiate with you on the side of the road. We'll give you half of it if you sign this form saying you won't protest about the other half. Vandrell Stewart had $17,000 that he was using to buy equipment in Washington, D.C. taken from him. It took him a year to get it back. He was never charged with anything. There were no drugs in his car. He wasn't involved that anybody knew of in anything illegal. Christos Cerevolos had a 14-year-old kid in Philadelphia who sold drugs, who sold $40 worth of drugs, illegal drugs, out of the house. What do you think we ought to do? Maybe we ought to punish the kid. What do you think we ought to do to his dad? Think we ought to take his house? They took the dad's house. You think you're going to help a teenager who's doing the wrong thing by taking the parent's house? Realize that a lot of kids like this don't have a dad. They may be living in grandma's house. Grandma's the only one with stability and the only one keeping the family together, and grandson's selling marijuana. We take grandma's house? This is crazy. When you look at how it's being applied disproportionately to poor people. There are more poor people that are African American, more poor people that are Hispanic. So when you look at all the people having their money taken and all the people being treated inappropriately, it turns out there's a disproportionate amount of people who are black or brown being scarfed up by the government. If we want to be a bigger party, we want people who live in poverty and are being mistreated by big government overcriminalization, let's be the champion of the entire Bill of Rights. Let's be the people who say, government should never take your property unless you're convicted of a crime. The Sixth Amendment says that you should always have a trial by jury. And you say, well, certainly no one could be against that. In 2011, we passed legislation that says that an American citizen can be indefinitely detained and sent to Guantanamo Bay. So we had this debate on the floor, and I'm having this debate with another Republican senator. And I don't like to mention any names, but he was from Arizona. And I said incredulously, I said, do you mean an American citizen could be sent to Guantanamo Bay without a lawyer, without a trial, without a jury trial? And his response was yes, if they're dangerous. It's like, kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Who gets to decide who's dangerous and who's not dangerous? Remember Richard Jewell? Richard Jewell, everybody said was the Olympic bomber. The TV convicted him. Within an hour or two, he was on every television network, and they said he was the bomber. The only problem was, he wasn't. But he fit the profile. He had glasses. I I see some of you. He was an introvert. I see some of those too. He had a backpack. He looked like he ought to be the bomber, but he wasn't. He was innocent, completely and entirely innocent. But think if Richard Jewell had been a black man in the South in 1920, what would have happened to him? Think of how important it is to prevent bias and to prevent a discriminatory government, a government that once upon a time incarcerated 100,000 Japanese Americans for no crime. A government that once upon a time treated blacks as second-class citizens and didn't get appropriate trials by jury. Think about if we, the Republican Party, that were and are and still is the party of emancipation, of civil rights. Think if we could once again be the party of the entire Bill of Rights that says every citizen deserves a trial with a lawyer because we're afraid of systemic bias. We're afraid of what the government might do if left to their own devices. If we're that party, imagine how big we become as we become the party of the entire Bill of Rights. There was a young man, a young black man from the Bronx by the name of Khalif Browder, 16 years old, accused of a crime. He was sent to Rikers Island. He spent 3 years there and was never ever tried for his crime. That shouldn't happen in America. He was beaten by gangs in prison. Who knows what happened to him? He tried to commit suicide while in prison. He was finally released. The person who accused him of the crime wasn't even here in the country legally and was gone. But they kept having date after date after date of his trial moved out. You're supposed to get a speedy trial in our country. You know what? If the Republican Party becomes the party that defends the Sixth Amendment as much as we do the Second Amendment, we're going to win elections in a landslide. That's what I want to say. I think we win again by being boldly for what we are for. In fact, being more boldly for what we are for. I think if we become the defenders of the entire Bill of Rights, if we passionately defend the Bill of Rights like Patrick Henry did, and I think if we also present our message with hope and optimism. I like the words of a painter by the name of Robert Henry who said, "Paint like a man coming over the hill singing." I love the picture of that, the image of that. I think if we become the party that defends with passion, like Patrick Henry, the Bill of Rights, but also presents our message to those who haven't been hearing from Republicans, we present that message with hope and optimism. Like a man coming over the hill singing, then we win Iowa, we win the nation, and we lead us out of this malaise. I want to be part of that, and I hope you do too. Thank you. And if you want to be part of our Iowa Army, help us to win the nomination, help us to win the election. Steve's going to tell you how.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you for coming out. We've got 160 people here, and we really appreciate it. Now, two things. One, on your chair you should have had a volunteer card and should have also received a booklet. But if you walked in, can you see this little lapel pin on my jacket?